Okay, this is Video 4. Welcome to Video 4. This is about after the leap, the immediate time after the leap into immortality. If you have not watched them yet, please take time to watch the other videos first. If you take this out of context, you'd be lost and think it's weird. Or at least in more weird than you probably already think it is. This environment that we're in, this reality that we're in, is definitely not normal. I don't know if you even can use the word normal anymore after seeing a lot of things around us. Things get weird quickly when you step away from the natural order of living, dying exactly as nature has for thousands and millions of years. Getting, basically whatever nature gave you, your hands and whatever hut that you have. I mean, that's natural. I don't know that you can call buildings and spaceships and all the rest of it natural, but it is what it is. We are where we are, and there's a lot of things that we have to think about. The technology that we have has not been around for millions of years. It's not been tried over that long of a period of time. I mean, in any environment, when you have stuff, whatever it is, time is a great test that will weed things out. It is true for evolution, and it's also true for the technology and the behavior that we bring into our lives. So, the leap, if we remember, their society was not the best society in the world. Well, I mean, it's the only society that was around then that they know about, that they interacted with. But it was warlike. A lot of times they'd almost wiped themselves out a few times. Then they made the leap to want to go to immortality. If you remember, they went to different bodies because the ones their body was dying. And just recap, as scary as that sounded, they didn't have a choice. As much technology as they have, eventually, after prolonging it, it's going to go. And so, another thing, I mean, not to rehash the same thing we did in the last video too much, but another thing, like an example that I'd have, is the transporter in Star Trek. When somebody goes into the transporter, transports themselves from one spot to another, there's no doubt that it's the same person coming out. I mean, you see the same scars, the same mind, the same memories, the same clothes, the same everything down to the most minute detail. It is the person. You look down to the cellular level. It's the same. Now, taking that into context of changing, like basically bringing the essence, the soul of who you are from one body to the new or improved version, your mind, your mental processes, the synapses, the neurons, everything, the memories and the information processing that made you who you were there, basically means moved over. It might be newer tissue, it might be a newer body, but there it is. It's moved over. And you look at your limbs, for example. I mean, how many years does it take you to have the cells completely change out to new cells that are, say, in your arm? I mean, really, if you cut off your arm and put on a new one that looked exactly the same and felt exactly the same, really, I mean, you wouldn't question it. The mind is something more special. But they were able to move it into a more stable platform. And thus they were excited, they were happy, they were amazed that they weren't dead, that they felt like themselves. So, also, if you remember, they went into a different dimension that still was here, but just a different frequency as you were. If you remember, we talked a little bit about what dimensions really are. Not the science fiction, not the science quote-unquote fact that has, fed to our scientists They're not ever going to get dimensions right. There's no way that they're going to do it. They think they're opening up portals to this place to that with CERN. They're opening up portals to fantasy created by a wonderful theater department. But the real dimensions, yeah, they move to a different dimension. Here, same planet, untouched by everything that their society had done for its entire history. It was completely untouched. It was a brand new place. A place where they had never been. And so, that also, I mean, there's a lot of possibilities there. New bodies, sturdier, more robust, a new place. But there's also a lack of complete infrastructure there, of basically everything. And so, there's nothing there. I mean, it's just basically, here you go, have a fun nature hike. Oh, by the way, you're living here now. Yeah, they had some time to prepare. Obviously, they're not just going to literally jump into a place with no resources, literally at all, and no way of getting more resources. So they certainly did bring across some fundamental basic stuff. But all in all, I mean, you get the gist of it. It's hopping into a new spot, and they need to basically start from scratch. And so they did a little bit what any good people would do. They worked hard and took stuff from the other dimension that they came from. It's, whoops, mine now, thank you. You know, just out of necessity, because they needed it and they could, and they were the best hope humanity had. And they didn't try to unduly burden anybody, but when they needed something, occasionally they took it. And they got started that way. This was not a group of what we would call necessarily hugely enlightened people. These are scientists that were doing the best they can, that were living at the edge of their means, that barely made it. I mean, there was times when they were so close to not making it. But they made it. They were happy. And it took a lot of work. But slowly over the years, they built that from literally nothing into a thriving community. Now, they had kids, as I said, and it's not like what you might think now of what it was. It's basically you have a kid, you try to teach them the best you can, and 20 years later, they're having their own kids too. The population grew quickly. Now, if you remember, there's 500 people roughly that made it. I don't know if it's 500 scientists plus family and friends, or if that 500 included the family and friends. But that's a rough number. And so, as you could tell what happened to the genetic pool, the oldest of them, they don't feel like they're related. But really, literally, everybody else in society did become related real quick. I mean, you don't have the luxury of having different societies. You don't have the luxury of different races. You don't have the luxury of pretty much anything, because you're one society, one family from that point on. You're all related. And for the good of the species, you have to be. I mean, you have to have enough genetic diversity in the mix to keep going. But they grew, and they taught their kids the best they could to try to avoid war, to try to be peaceful, to try to not make the mistakes that their previous society did. But one thing they didn't count on was the genetics themselves. Our genetics play a lot larger role in our lives and in making a society what it is than you might think. The genetics themselves, over the long run, I mean, look at, say, a group of boys, for example, over 100 years, over 1,000 years. The hormones make their likes and dislikes generally tend towards what nature thinks that they should. Not that nature's an actual entity, but, I mean, you get the picture. Boys like girls. Boys like this, boys like that, because a lot of hands, they're pre-programmed to. The hormones are very strong. The way the brain processes information is very strong. Now, you take things like this and add the time element in it. And in a society, culture starts evolving based on the individual likes and the history of the people that are there. And those hormones shape what goes into the culture, what goes into the beliefs, what goes into the religions, what goes into basically every part about you, about your history. And it's not just nature versus nurture. The nature makes the nurture what it is, because over the long run, things get accepted into a society just as what it is, how life is, because it's been going on for so long. And so, if you had not had the exact genetics that we have, who knows what society would have been like. But it goes deeper than just, say, like the hormones with guys or girls or whatnot. It goes to people like the psychopaths, the mass murderers, the ones that take advantage of others, that steal, that do all these crazy stuff. Well, why is that? Yeah, there's individual choice. We all do have individual choice, but no matter how well that they tried to prepare themselves to make sure that that didn't come across, the genetics of it made for an interesting scenario where you had kids that were predispositioned to be more the sociopathic type. You had other things where the hormones over the long haul made them really want to start doing certain things like had been done before. They said to themselves, well, we're not going to make those same mistakes. We're of course not going to wipe out society, but we really want to have our fun. We don't believe that we're here just living forever in a jail just to not do anything. We're here, we're safe. I mean, look at it. There's no STDs anymore there. Everything's safe. Everyone's going to get taken care of. So if you have a kid, what's the big deal? I mean, it's going to get taken care of. There's a lot of people. No one really had to work. There's more than they had to work originally, but as time went on, as they really built out the infrastructure, and as they got things automated, no, I mean, not everybody had to work. You could have people just sitting around having fun. And what's the big deal? The people at the top were related to the ones that were underneath. They were still around, the people that were underneath. And, of course, they don't want a few people to just always be taking care of everybody else. But, they had automation. They could. What's the big deal about it? Well, another big deal is you add that time scenario, and there's no adequate way for me to describe what happened, but that it was a disaster. The extreme long lifespans that they had turned into a disaster. The digital drugs, the promiscuity that some of them had, just the list goes on and on. These little things, even like alcohol, that you wouldn't think it's anything. It just adds over time to where you have people wanting to go towards those reliefs over and over again, eventually making you wanting to work less and have more fun and get lazy. And you got to the point there where it wasn't one person taking care of one or two others, but you would have one person taking care of literally 100 others, because they felt entitled. They felt they made it. They felt that we had the technology and the automation to do it. And then other people just didn't care. They had the ability to go take off and have fun, so they did. And this fun turned sideways. You had people that started taking extreme advantage of others, taking advantage of the situations. You had people threatening each other. Anger started rising, tensions. And it went from what I would never do that because we just have known better, we've been taught better, to the cold reality of how the things were working. It took a long time of going and a long time of thinking about how they were going to fix this, but they weren't necessarily given too much choices on one hand because people naturally started splintering off on their own. I mean, they didn't like the way that they were forced into certain rules. They wanted to do what they wanted to do, and it started splintering, as you can imagine it would. But the laziness took a hold of some. I mean, not everyone was completely lazy. They want to break off on their own. They certainly are going to plan for the infrastructure and whatnot. But ultimately, there came a time when it was getting so bad that the leaders of the main group just had to cut everyone else off. They said there's certain minimum levels of things you're going to need to do. You're going to need to clean yourself up and live by certain standards so that we don't have this craziness that's come back in there. Because there were people trying to murder each other again. There were people trying to do all sorts of things and it was clear that they would eventually destroy themselves the way that they were going, because all of that stuff was slowly coming right back in there where it had been peaceful. It was peaceful for a bit, but it was back. And it was degrading rapidly because now you have the extreme long lifespans and the psychology of it was driving people mad. They had to figure out a better way. They were, put to the fire, and they decided to cut people off. They said, okay, you live like this, you follow these rules, you live with us, this should keep us safe, or you're on your own. I mean, there has to be a line somewhere, and this is our line. And we don't want to cut you off, but it is what it is. We can't continue to do this because over the generations, if you're going to have a whole generation of people that are lazy, not doing anything, you have a whole nother generation after that. They're going to keep having kids and keep having kids. Then instead of one person taking care of 100, you have one person taking care of 1,000 or 10,000. Where does it go? I mean, there is a limit to how much people can do. They were at their limit. The people that were working, granted there was some automation, but they were working and working and working. It was at the point where it was cracking and ready to blow up. So when they cut everything off, they gave warning, people did what they wanted to do, and they splintered off however they wanted to splinter off. And it so happened that, I mean, if you remember the story of the devil, how he took a third of the hosts of heaven with him, well, part of that's fantasy, but really, I believe this is where it came from. This right here, this scenario is where it happened. And it wasn't a third of the hosts of heaven, not even close. Of the people that were living in that initial time frame, 90% didn't make it. 90+%. I mean, it was a huge number of people that had the technological ability to keep going that just didn't want to join the main group. Now, keeping in mind that the bodies that they had were not bodies that would be good literally forever. They didn't quite make it that. I mean, they're still biological based, and still you had to keep changing things around, and you needed a certain level of technology to do it. And it wasn't easy still. I mean, it was a lot easier for them to do it, the ones at the top, the ones that have done it. But the rank and file that have just been sitting there doing nothing but having a good old time, no, I mean, it's not going to be easy for them. They're not going to be able to do it. So realistically speaking, you know that if you split off and you don't come back, you are looking at a death sentence, a slow death sentence, but it's going to happen. You will die eventually because there's just not the technology. It's not been given to you. You haven't reached out for it. You haven't been through the training. You haven't been through the science of it. And despite knowing it's the death sentence, they went off anyway. When you've lived as long as they lived, it's not necessarily a good thing to just say, I want to live forever. At least not that way. They didn't want to be living forever in a cage. They wanted to be free for whatever length of time they had. I mean, there's a lot of you could probably understand that. They wanted to live, and they lived to the fullest. They also took advantage of each other and were doing all sorts of things. But yeah, It was a slow road to death. And as individuals, they could still have their kids and still keep going on with societies, but it was a slow road to death for each individual person. And they went anyway because they'd rather have a short existence. It was still decently long than a living forever in a cage, basically. And so, yeah, about, say, at least 90% of all the people alive back then didn't make it. Of the original group of 500 scientists or so, you have around, I think, 200 now, maybe 250, somewhere in there. But you have probably around 200 that are still around. And so, I mean, like, to this day, yeah, we still have the original ones here. They're still alive. They're still kicking. They're still with us. And they're still running things. It's amazing to think the people from that long ago are still, but yeah, they are. They made it. Over the long course of the years, they went on and did some great things. So, keeping in mind in all this, what are the things they're working on? Let's bring it back here to recap some stuff. They're working on technologies to keep physically going over the many, many, many years. They're working on the technology to move the consciousness from one body to another or to digital formats. They're working on ways of getting the environment better, they were aware of the whole mentality of I don't want to live in a cage. It shouldn't be a prison. They didn't want this to be a prison, so they were working in quality of life issues. What can we do and what can't we do in an extremely long period of time that's going to work for us? There's all these questions that they didn't have the answers to, and they were just going blind on all of it. And that's really where they were at. They were in the midst of our dark period. So when we talk about the leap is the time when they leapt to immortality. This trial by fire, when we say trial by fire, this is the period we're talking about now. And it lasted a while. The trial by fire was not just like a short period of time that, okay, wow, and then it's over and we figured it out. Boom, there we go, we're better now. No, the trial of fire period was a long period of time. And it wasn't solid, okay, everything is just so dreary. Yeah, there were times when they just wanted to end it all. Even the top of the top, they wanted to lead it just to die because of how much suffering that they were going through and how many kids that they really liked that were just going off and just going to eventually die. There was a lot of really bad things that they didn't like having to go through. But there were good times, too, in that trial of fire. There were wonderfully happy times. There were a lot of good experiments that were discovered. The technology just went massively forward. The amount of stuff that they were able to do just increased dramatically. Keeping in mind that these people were the same scientists as the ones that made the initial leap. And they were here all these years later, still the same scientists, but with smarter minds. They ramped up memory so that you don't forget anything. You remember everything. And so IQ can go up, you have recall can go up. And then not to mention you don't like here in our world, you get one scientist learning something, then he gets good and he gets in his prime, and then eventually he retires and you have to have someone else take up the mantle. You don't have that problem there. The same scientist is going to be running experiments for the thousands of years. You can have quantum leaps in technology in time frames that you wouldn't think possible. And they had the time. They had plenty of the time. So in this trial by fire period, yeah, you had really depressing times, but these were also the times in which we really learned to grow into who we are. A lot of important discoveries of morality, of science, of technology, of everything came out of this period. And it was a period of great discovery as well. But all in all, it's an uncomfortable period they don't want to go through again. So right now you have the trial of fire. The period with the trial of fire starting basically right after they hit the eternities, right when they started getting their, they first made it. They were very happy at first, but in the grand scheme of things, stuff started happening right away. I mean, not instantly, but fairly quickly. And then that led on and off for a while. I mean, long enough to where they were able to make quite a number of scientific breakthroughs. They basically grew from a really small community of 500 to a force to be reckoned with. They had the numbers, they had the technology. They were doing really, really well. And the education for their kids was a mix between standard stuff. It had lengthened out since, they're not going to die. The kids weren't getting married at 20 years old anymore. What they did is they went through a lot more extensive training program that included simulators, classroom knowledge, and they even started putting some observation of other species eventually. So when one of those other species was us, actually. But yeah, you had the education was pretty much just a mix of that. Simulators, training, classroom, helping out with others that are younger. The ones that are older help out with the ones that are younger, and the ones that are younger help out with ones that are younger still. I mean, it was working. They got a lot more stable. They got the rate of people wanting to leave down considerably. It still wasn't zero, but it was down considerably, and they were starting to get at a point where they were a lot more stable, and it was more of an inconvenience and a sadness for the kids that they lost, rather than something that was just incredibly devastating like the initial 90% had been. So from there, you have a group that has grown in size, grown in technology, grown in power, grown in a number of ways, a lot of ways, and grown in stability. It was something that they felt that they could really keep this going if they had to. They wanted something new. They wanted something stable. They knew they weren't quite stable yet, but they were getting there. They were getting better. They also, on a side note, they did, through this long period of growth and looking for stability, they did look back and keep tabs on their old society they had come from. And in that time of the trial of fire, it was a considerable length. They wiped themselves out. The other group, the older group, the ones that they had come from originally, wiped themselves out. It finally did happen, and they weren't too surprised by it, a little saddened, but they decided to just leave the world dead. There's no life there anymore. I mean, no, there might be some animal life, I'm not sure, but there's certainly no human life. It's just dead world, and they're just leaving it that way because it's one of the natural dimensions, and they don't want anything like if there was any other species that came here at some time in the future, that just is a bunch of nothing to see. They like to stay hidden. When I say natural dimensions, in this trial of fire time, they found the ability to make new dimensions. You know how that in the dimensions you have the small particles traveling through basically like a wave, like different frequencies, different energy, something, I don't know exactly, but it changes. So there are certain frequencies that are just natural, that just naturally occur. And in the other frequencies, just wasn't anything. But in that time frame, they had learned to create artificial frequencies that did not naturally have anything there. And so it's, of course, still here, still in this space, but at a different frequency, it doesn't interact with anything else. They're hiding very well like that. It additionally, they're able to, with the non-natural frequencies, reduce the footprint that they'd be able to see or be seen by others that were looking. Because in the natural frequencies like ours, there's always something that's in phase at any given time. There's always some, because some molecules are going in and out of, or, subatomic particles going in and out of existence. And there's always some in at any given time, and there's always some out at any given time. But in their dimension, they were able to get those particles to match up better to where they come in and out at pretty much the same time. There's not really going to be any fuzz or any static on those frequencies when it's not the right time. And so trying to find them is going to be incredibly difficult. Not only do you have to first get the technology to know what dimensions really are, but then you have to go and try to find the exact right time and the right frequency, which is incredibly difficult even if you're good at the technology. So that's where they're at now. They're here on the new frequencies. Another benefit of that is there's a technique called atom sharing. If an atom and its parts are organized in a certain way into molecules, into things in one frequency, there is a technique that they learned over the time and over the many years to basically keep them in that same position when they go into another frequency change or another state change. And so therefore basically you copy the object. It's actually the same object, the same material anyway. The only thing you have to do is keep it from going out of that position when the subatomic particles change their state. And so you have, it's called atom sharing, and this is one of the ways which they were able to make those artificial frequencies. Just basically make those, make the whole planet exist on a brand new frequency that hadn't really, that really hadn't been useful before. Nothing really happened there. And along with that, you can have really interesting things happen. Like if you want to build a spaceship and you want to do it with no seams, that's how you do it. They use atom sharing to share the materials out of, rocks or wherever they want to share it out of. And they just have them go into a new form, into a spaceship. Or, whatever. They don't need spaceships anymore, but, for show and for the dramatics of it. I mean, that's how they do it without seams. And basically, they want to avoid having to do a lot of work, which they do like doing, avoiding work whenever possible. They just take one of our buildings and atom share it and use it for themselves. It's like the pyramids. When they built the pyramids or helped the Egyptians, but the Egyptians were the ones doing the hard work, of course. But that's fine because they were learning and growing and getting stuff out of themselves. But once they were finished, they, of course, wanted souvenirs, and so they atom shared the pyramids as they were then in their nice, complete state in a number of different frequencies. And so you can still see tourist attractions there of the real, complete pyramids as they looked way back in the day, which is an interesting sight. People do still go see it, and it's, they have a better climate control. That you're not necessarily going to the middle of a desert to see the pyramids. You're going to a nice environment. And so the worlds they live in are really nice. They have technology in the atmosphere where there's nanometers. The nanometers adjusting themselves to spread the light naturally across the Earth as it's needed to balance the temperature zones out. And in the mountains, they have them adjusted for better airflow. Little things here and there that'll help climate and airflow and weather around the world. And then they have little zones of cold. If people want to go skiing, they can certainly make it a little colder enough to ski in certain like mountains and whatnot. And then, of course, especially climate-controlled stuff around the cities. It's a really nice place. But anyway, this is getting off topic. But yeah, this is the trial of fire period. Starting to get over. That's how it is. Everything good. But then not stable still. They still have losses with the kids. There's still some infighting here and there. Compared to what it was, it's a lot less. But at least they feel that they're starting to be able to breathe. And that brings us to the next big thing. Us. And so in the next video, we will go over how this all started with us, with this world, with the craziness that it's here. We're also going to get started with the organization of what it's like over there. Like before you go here to the earth, once you're here, after you die, the organization with the training programs up to being, at the God level. And the councils and the political organizations over there. And of course, all that eventually is going to lead up to the problems that we're having now, and so that you can understand them and be a good citizen, and hopefully lend your voice to do good things once you know the conversation. Until then, talk to you later.